Michael Jordan gets denied service at restaurant and his epic comeback leaves everyone speechless. In a small town, Harper's Diner is tucked away on a quiet main street. It is known for its homemade pies, friendly waitstaff, and cozy atmosphere. One day, Michael Jordan, a renowned figure with strong political views, decides to stop by for a meal. He's hungry and eager to enjoy the famous mashed potatoes he has heard rumors about. Yet, what happens next is startling and transformative. The owner refuses to serve him because of disagreements with his politics. Tension ripples through the diner, and the people inside bracing themselves for an ugly confrontation. But instead of anger or bitterness, a moment of compassion arises that will change the fate of Harper's Diner and the entire town itself. Out of an act of kindness that no one expected, walls are broken down, and hearts are opened. Michael Jordan pulled his sleek car into the gravel parking lot of Harper's Diner with a subtle sigh of relief. The journey along winding back roads had been longer than he expected, and his stomach rumbled in protest as he parked near a faded sign that read, "Best Burgers in Town." Stepping outside, he inhaled the scent of fried onions and fresh bread drifting through the air. The building looked humble, painted in light pastels that had seen better days, but felt welcoming at first glance. Eager for a hearty meal, Michael walked up the creaky steps and entered through a door framed by a tarnished brass handle. Once inside, his eyes landed on a warm interior. Families chatted over dinner, couples shared milkshakes, and a few regulars sipped coffee at the counter. The lighting was soft, and the faint hum of an old jukebox playing an upbeat tune floated through the room. He removed his jacket and headed toward a vacant table near the window, hoping to settle in quietly. Immediately, he noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The diner's owner, a stocky individual named Harper, glanced his way with an unmistakable frown. Perhaps Harper recognized him from television or the buzz surrounding his political campaigns. Michael was not just a basketball legend anymore. He was also a passionate advocate for specific social policies, and his stances stirred many debates across the country. He sat, folding his hands in front of him politely, anticipating a server to come by with a menu. Instead, the entire place fell silent. Harper stomped over, arms folded across a checkered apron, and looked directly at Michael. There was no gentle hello, no friendly greeting. A hush spread through the other customers, who set down their forks and straws to stare. Michael could sense that something big was about to happen. He tried to remain calm, offering a slight nod of acknowledgement. Before he could speak, Harper cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he said in a low tone, "but we don't want to serve you here. We don't serve people who stand for what you do, not in my diner." A wave of shock flickered across the faces of the other patrons. Michael's own expression wavered between confusion and disappointment. The hush grew even thicker as everyone waited for an angry outburst. Yet, Michael blinked. His shoulders stiffened slightly, but he did not lash out. Instead, he stood up slowly from the table. He glanced around at the staff, some of them wearing expressions of regret or fear. Then he looked Harper in the eye, voice steady as he replied, "I understand." With that short answer, he grabbed his coat, turned on his heel, and walked out without another word. The entire diner seemed frozen in that moment. A few customers whispered among themselves. Others grew red-faced with tension. Even Shella, a waitress who had been about to pour coffee for an elderly customer, paused mid-pour, her mouth open in disbelief. She had seen many disagreements inside these walls, but never before had she witnessed Harper outright refusing someone in such a public manner. Yet, Michael left quietly, refusing to let the situation deteriorate into a shouting match or a scandalous scene. His footsteps echoed on the worn diner floor, followed by the soft tinkling of the bell above the door as it closed behind him. Outside, dusk settled over the parking lot as he eased into his car. Thoughts swirled in his mind. Frustration, sorrow, a pang of hunger still gnawing at him. But he quickly composed himself and drove off into the gathering darkness, leaving a stunned crowd who could only stare at the empty parking space where the living legend had just been. Harper remained rooted in place, jaw set, as though he had made a monumental decision. A heavy quiet settled over the diner, and the only sound was the low hum of that old jukebox playing a tune now tinged with apprehension. Harper's life story was written in the faint lines across his face and the determined set of his jaw. He was shaped by years of toil in that small town, carrying the weight of family burdens and a relentless dedication to his own moral code. Long before Harper's Diner became a staple in the community, Harper had grown up just down the road, raised by parents who taught him to stand firm for what he believed was right. His parents ran a modest store that sold homemade jams and handcrafted items, a gathering place for folks who appreciated old-fashioned values. They never told Harper it was easy to hold a stance, but they insisted it was necessary to defend one's principles, even when everyone around you thought otherwise. Years later, Harper inherited that spirit of conviction. When he heard about Michael Jordan's outspoken political opinions, especially the ones that clashed with his worldview, he felt his blood boil. Harper believed those viewpoints threatened communities' unity nationwide, stirring division rather than fostering understanding. He remembered stories of how his grandfather, a war veteran, had suffered under policies that reminded Harper of some of Michael Jordan's stances. Each time he saw a news clip of Jordan passionately discussing these issues, Harper found himself reliving old family wounds, real or imagined. In his mind, denying Jordan's service at the diner felt like a small stand against a more significant wave of influence. It was a symbolic gesture that Harper thought would show his neighbors he was steadfast. But Harper did not anticipate the disquiet settling over the diner staff. Sheila, for instance, had grown fond of the place from day one of her employment. She cherished the paycheck and the community feeling the diner brought to everyone who walked in. When she saw Harper march up to Michael Jordan, her heart pounded. She knew how explosive political confrontations could become. She feared it might tarnish the diner's reputation, but more importantly, she worried it would bruise the openness that places like Harper's Diner were supposed to represent. After Michael left, she pulled Harper aside, biting her lip nervously as she spoke. "Are we really okay with sending someone away just because we don't like his views?" She kept her voice low, not wanting to stir another scene. Harper's eyes flashed with a stubborn glint. "Yes," he replied. "I can't in good conscience serve a man who promotes ideas that I believe hurt people. Not in my diner. Not on my watch." Sheila knew how deeply he felt about his convictions, and she respected him as a boss and friend. But she also sensed a storm was brewing. She felt in her bones that turning Michael Jordan away would not simply fade from the town's memory. It might set off a chain of events no one could control. The rest of the staff, from the cook who had been flipping burgers in the back to the dishwasher who had overheard the exchange, murmured their own concerns. "This can't be good for business," one whispered. Another shrugged, quietly saying that politics had no place in the kitchen. Mixed emotions swirled all around, and soon, customers left without dessert, frowning with confusion or sympathy. Some supported Harper, nodding in approval and claiming he had done the right thing by sticking to his ideals. Others muttered that it was a shame to refuse food to anyone, especially someone who had only come in for a simple meal. Harper, however, hardened his heart. He returned to the counter, wiped it down, and continued his evening routine. In his mind, this was a necessary stand that proved he wouldn't buckle under social pressure. Still, a subtle flicker of regret crossed his face now and then, as though a tiny voice in the back of his mind questioned whether fighting political battles in a local diner was the wisest path. Late that night, as he locked up, his thoughts were a swirling mess of pride, fear, and uncertainty, leaving him staring at the neon sign outside as it flickered in the darkness. Michael Jordan drove away from Harper's Diner, his stomach still growling for the meal he had hoped would be quick and comforting. The road stretched before him under the pale glow of streetlights, and he found himself lost in thought about what had just occurred. Part of him wanted to be angry or let out a bitter laugh at the absurdity of being turned away from a simple diner. However, a deeper part of him recalled the values instilled in him by the people who had guided him through life. He thought about his grandmother, who had been a cornerstone of compassion in his upbringing. She was the one who always reminded him, respond to hatred with understanding and to rejection with love. That's how real change happens. She had taught him humility could be more powerful than any protest sign or shouting match. So instead of reaching for his phone to blast the diner online or calling influential friends to complain, he breathed and let the tension in his shoulders ease. The memory of Harper's face lingered in his mind. Harper had looked so resolute, so sure that refusing Michael was the correct thing to do. Michael was no stranger to disagreements. He navigated heated political arenas, faced public scrutiny, and tackled personal challenges on and off the court. Yet, something about being denied a plate of food because of who he has stirred a poignant sense of sadness rather than raw anger. The radio played softly in the background as he drove, offering light tunes that hardly matched his somber mood. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed tired eyes, a man who had seen a lot of conflict in recent months. It dawned on him that Harper's actions were likely born out of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of ideas that challenged long-held beliefs, or fear that Michael's political presence would overshadow the diner's identity. Though the refusal stung, he couldn't help but understand that behind every stance lay a story, a personal journey that led someone to take such a bold position. His heart ached for the divisions growing wider daily, not just in that small town but throughout the country. Pulling into a gas station to fill up, he stepped out and felt the cool night air wash over him. He debated if he should buy a bag of chips from the station's convenience store to quell his hunger, but he was more weighed down by thoughts than by the pangs in his stomach. The station's fluorescent lights flickered, and a moth danced around one of the bulbs. It reminded him that people can be drawn to conflict like moths are drawn to bright lights, sometimes not knowing they might get burned. Returning to his car, Michael glanced at a missed call on his phone. It was from a good friend who often provided wise counsel. For a moment, he considered calling back to unload his frustrations. Instead, he decided to sit with his emotions for a while longer. He recalled his grandmother's words again, turning them over like a comforting mantra. Her voice told him that giving in to anger would only deepen the chasm between him and Harper, pushing them further from any possibility of resolution or understanding. He started the engine, determined to let the motor's hum guide him toward a calmer perspective. If his grandmother taught him one thing, it was that every act of rejection can be met with an act of compassion. That belief was the seed of an idea forming in his mind that might help him respond to Harper's refusal in a way that wasn't driven by petty retaliation. The more he thought about it, the more he believed there might be a chance to turn this negative experience into a bridge rather than a wall. With a faint smile, Michael resolved to not let this night end in bitterness. Instead, he would find a way to transform it into something positive. Not just for himself, but for the entire town that Harper called home. A few hours after leaving Harper's Diner, Michael Jordan sat in a modest hotel room, its walls painted a dull beige and the carpet worn thin from years of passing travelers. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone, debating what to do. Part of him wanted to fall asleep and forget the embarrassment of being turned away. Another part of him recalled the pledge he'd made to respond with compassion. Eventually, he opened a social media app and began typing a post. "Hey everyone," he wrote. "If you ever find yourself in this small town, you might want to check out Harper's Diner. Word on the street is they serve some of the best home-cooked meals around. You'll love the burgers, pies, and the old-timey feel. Give them a try." He hesitated, fingers hovering over the screen. Would people see this and realize he referred to the same diner that refused him? Would it lead to more chaos for Harper, or might it intrigue new customers? It was a gamble, but he believed in offering kindness where it was least expected. With a determined nod, he hit post. Then he turned off his phone and got ready for bed, telling himself that no matter what happened next, he had chosen a path consistent with his values. Early the following day, long before Harper's Diner opened its doors, something extraordinary began to happen. People started sharing Michael's post, curious about why he would speak so fondly of a place after being refused service. Some speculated that he was being sarcastic or mocking the owner underhandedly. Others believed he was simply gracious. Still others had never heard of Harper's Diner before, but now they wanted to experience its food. Meanwhile, in the small town, Harper awoke to several notifications on his phone. His diner's social media page, typically quiet except for posts about the lunch special, was blowing up with new followers, comments, and even some rave reviews from locals who had read about the place and wanted to share their experiences. Confused, Harper tried to make sense of the sudden attention. He firmly rejected Michael Jordan but had not anticipated any direct fallout beyond local gossip. Now, a wave of out-of-town interest was rolling in, and it seemed to have been sparked by Michael himself. Sheila was the first staff member to notice something was off. She arrived at the diner early to do prep work, expecting another routine day. Instead, she found a line of cars inching down the road, people stepping out to snap pictures of the diner's exterior. Some asked if it was the famous place Michael Jordan recommended. Sheila's eyes widened, and her jaw nearly dropped. She double-checked the sign to ensure it still read Harper's Diner, and not something else, as the entire scene felt surreal. Customers filtered in before the official opening time, filling the booths and chatting excitedly about the sudden wave of publicity. Sheila scrambled to seat everyone while the cook in the back hammered out orders of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. The phone on the counter rang non-stop, with reporters from local stations requesting interviews and curious travelers wanting to confirm the diner's hours. News spread quickly throughout the town. People who usually skipped breakfast at Harper's Diner decided to join the hustle and see what all the fuss was about. Neighbors texted each other, asking if they knew about the Michael Jordan post, and folks responded with a mixture of astonishment and skepticism. Was Michael being genuine, or was there a bigger plan at play? When Harper finally arrived, he had to push through the small crowd outside. Flustered, he stepped behind the counter, meeting Sheila's anxious gaze. In a hushed tone, she informed him that the flood of customers seemed to be coming in response to an online recommendation from Michael Jordan. Harper frowned, still not quite believing it. Why would a man he had so publicly refused turn around and send goodwill his way? It made no sense. Yet, the proof was undeniable. The diner was fuller than it had been in years, perhaps ever. The question on everyone's lips was the same: why would Michael Jordan promote the place that kicked him out? The town had never seen anything like it. By mid-morning, a line snaked around Harper's Diner, and townspeople gawked at the sudden commotion. It felt like a carnival had rolled in overnight, bringing a swirl of excitement and tension in equal measure. Local reporters showed up with cameras and microphones, jockeying for position to capture the face of the now notorious diner owner. A group of passers-by recorded footage on their phones, posting live videos with hashtags referencing Michael Jordan's strange endorsement. Speculation spread like wildfire. Some folks insisted that this had to be a trap, a cunning publicity stunt orchestrated by Michael Jordan to shame Harper publicly. He's just waiting for the perfect moment to post another update that humiliates the diner, one skeptic said. Another group, however, believed Michael's gesture came from a place of genuine goodwill. They pointed out that if it were revenge he was after, he would have told people to boycott the diner, not visit it. Others hovered between, unsure of what to believe yet undeniably drawn to the spectacle. Inside, the atmosphere was frantic. Sheila and the other waitstaff practically ran from table to table, taking orders, refilling drinks, and apologizing for delays. The cook's apron was smeared with flour and grease as he worked overtime to keep up with the growing orders pile. Even regulars, who had typically found a comfortable spot at the counter, were forced to wait for seats. Some scowled, feeling displaced in their local haunt, while others laughed at the unexpected events that jolted their sleepy town awake. Harper tried to maintain a stoic composure, but anyone who knew him could see the conflicted look in his eyes. On one hand, the diner was busier than it had been in years, a potential windfall for a place that often struggled to break even. On the other hand, the swirling media attention made Harper uneasy. A reporter cornered him by the cash register, camera rolling, microphone thrust forward. "Why do you think Michael Jordan recommended your diner after you refused to serve him?" she asked. Harper stammered, not used to being put on the spot in such a high-profile manner. Eventually, he responded clipped, "I can't say for sure. You'd have to ask him. We stand by our beliefs here." But even as he said it, he felt a pang of doubt gnawing at the pit of his stomach. Meanwhile, the townspeople had their own heated discussions. Some who despised Michael Jordan's political stance applauded Harper's refusal to serve him, praising the owner for having the courage of his convictions. Others argued that there was no excuse for turning away a paying customer who simply wanted a meal. These debates spilled over into other local businesses, like the barbershop, the pharmacy, and the post office, igniting conversations about whether kindness should override politics or if it was acceptable to let personal beliefs dictate who got served a plate of food. Among the crowd, a few familiar faces from local community groups arrived, eyeing the line of customers with curiosity. A small group of older citizens shook their heads, wondering what had happened to civility. "We used to solve our differences over a cup of coffee," one of them said in a tired voice, "but now everything is a showdown." The tension thickened whenever a newscaster or blogger used equipment to document the hot story in their little town. The town clerk even considered whether they needed extra police presence to handle the sudden influx of visitors. Harper soldiered on through the chaos, collecting payments, managing the flow of orders, and trying to maintain some semblance of calm. Each time the din of voices rose to a fever pitch, he felt his nerves fray slightly more. And each time someone mentioned Michael Jordan's strange act of kindness, Harper's stomach churned with gratitude and resentment. Gratitude for the business that could keep his diner afloat and resentment for the moral quandary it thrust upon him. Deep down, he knew he had to decide how to respond to such an unexpected wave of generosity, even if it originated from the man he had turned away. During the ongoing rush, the staff of Harper's Diner found themselves swirling through a whirlwind of emotions. Sheila dashed from table to table, trying to keep a polite smile glued to her face. She heard snippets of conversations. Do you think Harper regrets it? Is Michael Jordan doing this for publicity? I heard that Harper was just following his conscience. Sheila tried to stay neutral, even as her mind buzzed with questions. She knew she should be grateful for the generous tips now piling up on the tables. Customers from out of town were tipping generously, excited to be part of the spectacle. Yet, she couldn't shake the discomfort of how all this attention had come about. The rest of the staff was equally divided. Some of them, like one of the younger servers, Matt, seemed delighted by the crowd. Matt had big ambitions and saw this sudden fame as an opportunity. Hey, he'd say to customers with a grin, we might get so popular that we can expand. Maybe we'll open Harper's 2.0 on the other side of town. His bright enthusiasm clashed with the somber mood of others who felt the diner's essence was being twisted into a tourist attraction for the wrong reasons. One cook, Alvarez, bemoaned that it shouldn't take a social media post from Michael Jordan to get people to support local businesses. Aren't we good enough on our own? He stirred a soup vigorously as if trying to stir away his frustration. Outside the diner, the townsfolk watched the commotion with various opinions. Some longtime residents were thrilled to see new faces and potential economic growth, hoping the diner's sudden fame might rub off on the rest of the local scene. Hardware store owners and boutique managers daydreamed of increased foot traffic and better sales. Others, however, worried that this attention was fleeting and that the real heart of the town might be overshadowed by superficial hype. They did not want their community defined by a single incident of refusing service to a famous figure. Some passionately defended Harper's decision. If a man doesn't want to serve someone based on politics, that's his right, declared a gruff local who drank his black coffee every morning at the counter. It's still a free country, isn't it? A few folks around him nodded, even as they tapped their feet impatiently, waiting for a seat to open up. Others expressed outright disgust that Harper would refuse service to anyone. It's not like Jordan was causing a scene, said one woman who had taken an hour-long drive to eat at the now-famous diner. It's just plain rude. Harper himself tried to keep a lid on his emotions. Beneath his calm exterior simmered a growing sense of internal conflict. He needed the revenue now pouring through the cash register, especially since the diner's finances had been shaky for months. Yet, each time someone mentioned the gracious endorsement from Michael Jordan, Harper felt a twinge of guilt. He didn't ask for Jordan's help or want to appear as though he was capitalizing on a situation that started with his refusal to serve the man. Still, the new customers kept coming, and Harper had to handle them professionally. He tried to remain tight-lipped whenever reporters stopped by, worried that anything he said might feed the media frenzy. Regulars, meanwhile, stumbled into this sudden new reality with puzzled looks. Some felt they were betraying Harper's stance by continuing to eat at the diner after Michael Jordan's post had gone viral. Yet they couldn't resist the comfort of Harper's cooking, nor could they overlook how the diner now buzzed with an exhilarating and nerve-wracking kinetic energy. The regulars typically preferred a slow, predictable rhythm to their day. Now, lines formed at dawn, cameras snapped constantly, and the phone rang off the hook. Amidst all this, Sheila noticed that Harper's usual stoicism was cracking. She'd catch him standing in a corner, staring at the restaurant's bustling interior with a faint, worried crease on his forehead. She guessed he was wrestling with the moral implications of accepting the benefits of a kind act from a man he'd judged so harshly. Tension rose like steam in the kitchen, and it was clear that something had to give. The staff wondered what might happen next. Would Harper double down on his convictions, or would he find a way to reconcile them with this unexpected turn of fortune? Everyone sensed the weight of that question in the air, as though the entire diner were perched on a precarious ledge, waiting to see which way Harper would leap. Before continuing this strange and heart-tugging tale, let me pause and speak directly to you. Yes, you are reading this story. We are on a journey together, uncovering how one act of rejection blossomed into a complicated situation that no one could have predicted. Stories like these, filled with unexpected compassion and the courage to face our own values, are what this channel is all about. If you've enjoyed the story, I invite you to subscribe and help us reach our goal of 500 subscribers. It may not seem like a big number, but to us, it represents a community of people who believe in the power of storytelling to break down barriers. If you like this narrative, leave a comment that says, yes. If you're not quite on board, feel free to comment, 1. Remember, every perspective matters, just like in the story of Harper's Diner and Michael Jordan, where unexpected kindness can arise during conflict. Your support keeps these stories alive, proving that curiosity, empathy, and compassion thrive. So let's continue to unite, one story at a time, and push back against the divisions that seem to grow in our world. With that, let's return to our main plot and see how Harper, his staff, and the entire town respond to the wave of attention that has thrust them into the public eye. Days after the incident, a quiet morning found Harper clearing up after the breakfast crowd, taking a rare moment to pause and sip a cup of coffee. The phone rang incessantly, as usual, but he felt too tired to jump for it. He wondered if another reporter would seek a soundbite or another group of new customers wanting to verify the diner's hours. While he contemplated whether to let the call go to voicemail, Sheila called out, "Harper, there's a letter for you." She hurried over with a simple envelope, the front bearing no flashy emblems or stamps, just a return address that Harper didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued. Harper tore it open at the corner of the diner's counter. His eyes widened when he saw the elegant handwriting inside and realized it was from Michael Jordan. For a moment, Harper felt his heart pound. He swallowed hard, wondering if it would be full of accusations or anger, condemning how Harper had treated him. Instead, the letter read, "Harper, I hope this finds you well. I am contacting you to let you know there are no hard feelings. I understand you refused my service, and while that was disheartening, I also recognize that everyone has their reasons. Rather than harbor resentment, I'd like to support your diner and the small businesses that keep towns like yours alive. I remember my grandmother's words, 'If a man is hungry, feed him. If a man is in need, lend a hand.' Though I wasn't served that day, I still want to uphold the spirit of supporting local establishments because I believe in the power of community. Please know my recommendation was genuine, and I see a bright future for your diner. No matter our political differences, I still believe kindness can bridge divides. All the best, Michael Jordan." Harper read the letter twice, the words echoing in his mind. He felt a swirl of emotions, astonishment, confusion, and shame. Here was a man he had brushed aside, showing him nothing but respect and benevolence in return. Slowly, Harper folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope, feeling like he was holding something more than just a piece of paper. It was an invitation, albeit subtle, to reconsider his approach and possibly rectify what had happened. Sheila, noticing Harper's stunned expression, approached cautiously. "Bad news?" she asked quietly. Harper shook his head, letting out a slow breath. "No," he replied. "It's just unexpected." He showed her the letter, and she read it, eyes growing damp as she reached the closing lines. "He's being so kind," she whispered, surprised. The letter was not about preaching or guilt-tripping Harper but about building bridges. Word spread among the diner staff that Michael Jordan had sent a personal note to Harper, and a murmur of surprise went through them all. Some were moved by Michael's sincerity, which challenged their judgments about the man. Were they too quick to assume he would retaliate or use the incident for political gain? Gradually, conversations took on a more introspective tone. People began discussing the difference between defending one's beliefs and treating others with dignity. "Maybe it's okay to disagree without being so hostile," a cook remarked, wiping his hands on a stained apron. Sheila nodded, adding, "Sometimes, a small act of kindness can be more powerful than any argument." For his part, Harper wrestled with a complicated mix of relief and guilt. He slipped the letter into his back pocket, unable to stop rereading it in moments when the diner calmed down. It felt like a lifeline, tossed to him in a storm of his own making. He began to wonder if refusing Michael that day was really the best way to stand by his convictions, or if he had let pride obscure the simpler path of treating another human being with respect, even amid disagreements. As he wiped the counter, images of Michael quietly leaving the diner flashed through his mind. Then he thought of the letter's last lines, No matter our political differences, I still believe kindness can bridge divides. The words resonated with him, leaving a seed of change in his heart. Harper lay awake one night, staring at the spinning ceiling fan in his modest bedroom. The letter from Michael Jordan rested on a small nightstand beside him, illuminated by a dim lamp. The words had followed him everywhere, echoing during his morning coffee, whispering to him while he worked the grill and tugging at his conscience even as he tried to sleep. He wondered, did I do the right thing by refusing to serve him, or did I let my pride and past wounds get the best of me? He reflected on the influences that had shaped his convictions, particularly his late father, a man whose political views were deeply ingrained and who had always preached that one must never back down from a confrontation. Harper watched his father stand his ground in many heated debates growing up. He had admired his father's unwavering stance, seeing it as a form of integrity. Yet, as he replayed the scene at the diner in his mind, he realized there might be a fine line between standing up for one's beliefs and shutting out any chance of conversation or mutual understanding. In the following days, he confided in Shella, feeling the weight of guilt growing heavier. Shella listened patiently, her usual warmth and empathy shining through as Harper shared memories of his father and the battles he felt he had to fight on his father's behalf. She responded gently, reminding him that times change, people change, and sometimes holding on to old methods of dealing with conflict only creates more walls. "You fed me when I first came into town," Shella said, placing a reassuring hand on Harper's shoulder. "You didn't ask about my background or whether our beliefs matched. You just welcomed me because I was hungry and new here. That's the Harper I respect." Harper recalled that day clearly. Sheila had just moved to the area, low on money and hope, but Harper offered her a meal on the house. It was a small gesture, but it made a world of difference to her. He swallowed hard, realizing that his actions toward Michael Jordan hadn't reflected the generosity he once showed to a stranger in need. The letter on his nightstand felt like an indictment of that inconsistency. One evening, he had dinner at a close friend's place, a friend named Marvin who had been around the diner since its opening. Over home-cooked stew, Harper shared the turmoil in his heart, admitting that he felt torn between upholding his father's legacy of standing firm and embracing the kindness Michael Jordan had shown. Marvin, a soft-spoken man who had lost a son in the military, nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do," Marvin said, "is step away from anger and choose compassion instead. It doesn't mean you're weaker, it means you're wiser." Harper thanked Marvin but still found it hard to shake the tension in his chest. Whenever he saw the influx of customers at the diner, people who arrived because of Michael's endorsement, he felt conflict. He appreciated the business, yet he wondered if he was betraying his own beliefs by benefiting from the goodwill of someone he refused to serve. The staff had also caught on to Harper's unease, noticing how he would pause mid-task to stare vacantly, lost in thought. Some offered him support, while others politely kept their distance, unsure how to navigate the delicate situation. Night after night, Harper wrestled with the question: could he still be true to himself while opening the door to a more inclusive perspective? His father had taught him to be strong, but Michael's letter reminded him that strength might be found in empathy, too. Each time he read the line, "No matter our political differences, I still believe kindness can bridge divides," he felt a subtle shift in his heart. While he wasn't fully ready to renounce his stance on every issue, he began to see that refusing to feed a hungry person was not the best reflection of his deeply held values. At last, on a restless night, he sat on the edge of his bed and made a quiet vow to himself. He would find a way to honor both his personal convictions and the humanity of those he disagreed with. The next day, he decided, he would talk to his staff about his growing change of heart and perhaps begin taking steps toward reaching out to Michael Jordan once more. Early the next morning, Harper arrived at the diner before anyone else. The sky was still an inky blue as he unlocked the door, flicked on the fluorescent lights, and walked to the back room, where staff often took breaks. He stared at the worn wooden table, running a hand across its surface. This was where he had shared countless cups of coffee and pep talks with employees, discussing everything from scheduling conflicts to personal drama. But today's meeting would be different and more critical. Gradually, the staff trickled in, Shella yawning as she set down her handbag, Alvarez tightening his apron strings, Matt clutching a mug of steaming tea. They gathered around the table, sensing the seriousness in Harper's expression. Once everyone was seated, Harper cleared his throat. "I know it's been a wild few days," he began, fingers tapping nervously on the table's edge. I appreciate all of you working so hard during this sudden influx of customers. I called this meeting because there are things we need to talk about, big things." He inhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. "You all know about Michael Jordan's post and how it's brought us a lot of attention. Some good, some bad. We've also had calls from a local investment group that wants to help expand the diner and potentially turn us into a small franchise in the region." A couple of staff members exchanged excited looks while others raised their eyebrows in surprise. Matt, looking eager, asked, "Would that mean we get a brand new kitchen or more staff?" Harper nodded. It could mean all those things. It could also mean more money and more resources. But here's the catch. This group mentioned that they became interested after Michael Jordan's endorsement. In other words, we have an opportunity here directly tied to the man I refused to serve. A hush fell over the room. Sheila chewed on her lower lip, understanding the moral conflict. Alvarez shrugged and said, "So what? Maybe it's time we accept the help and move on." Another staff member quietly countered, "But wouldn't that be hypocritical? Harper took a stand against this guy, and now we're profiting from his support." Harper sighed, agreeing with both viewpoints in a complex tangle of emotion. "That's why I need your input," he said. "I'm torn. My refusal to serve him was based on principles I've held all my life. But now, I see that refusing someone doesn't solve anything. And I'm unsure how to handle accepting help linked to the same person I turned away." Sheila placed a gentle hand on Harper's arm. "Boss, we can't change the past," she said quietly. "But we can make choices about the future. Maybe this investment could help not just the diner but also the community. Please think of the jobs we could create. Please think of how we could reach out to people needing second chances. A bigger diner means more opportunities." Her eyes sparkled with a hopeful glimmer. An older cook, who rarely spoke up, cleared his throat. "You've always said this place was about more than just food, Harper. It was about giving people a sense of home. If taking this chance helps us continue that mission, isn't it worth considering? Even if it comes from someone you see as an opponent." Harper lowered his eyes, nodding slowly. He recognized the wisdom in these words. Yet he also sensed the tension in those who saw the potential hypocrisy. Matt, for instance, looked uncertain. "I just don't want us to lose our identity," he said. Harper's Diner was built on standing up for what's right. But maybe we need to think about what right really means. Is it about shutting people out or bringing them in? Harper exhaled, feeling both grateful and burdened by the staff's honesty. "I need time to think," he admitted. "But I promise, no decision will be made without your voices. We'll talk more about this soon." The meeting adjourned, and the staff prepared for the morning rush. Yet the atmosphere in the diner felt different, charged with the possibility that the old ways of doing things might be giving way to something new. Harper sensed that he stood on the precipice of a turning point, whether to cling to prideful convictions or embrace a broader, more inclusive vision. As the smell of bacon began to fill the kitchen, he quietly resolved to face this moral dilemma head-on. Whether it ended in expansion or not, Harper knew he needed a deeper reconciliation with Michael Jordan and, perhaps even more importantly, with himself. Late that afternoon, just as the lunch rush began to wane, an older woman named Eliza shuffled into Harper's Diner, supported by a cane in one hand and a small handbag in the other. She was a local fixture, someone who had known Harper since he was a boy. Over the years, she had visited the diner countless times, always ordering the same tuna sandwich and a cup of tomato soup. Today, however, her visit held a different purpose. She beckoned Harper over to her usual table, tapping the cane lightly against the floor. "Harper, dear," she said in a warm yet shaky voice. "I've been hearing a lot about all this fuss with Michael Jordan, and I wanted to tell you something I've never shared." Harper leaned in, curious. Eliza glanced around to ensure no one else was within earshot, then continued, "When I was a much younger woman, I spent a summer volunteering in Chicago, working with a community youth sports program. Believe it or not, I came across Michael's mother, Dolores, during that time." Harper's eyebrows shot up. He knew Eliza had lived a whole life but had never heard about any connections to Michael Jordan's family. Eliza's eyes glimmered as she recounted how she had met Dolores Jordan at a local church function aimed at helping young athletes find mentors. "Your father," she added quietly, helped send me there. He believed in supporting folks who wanted to do good for children. He told me, if you can find a way to help those kids, I'll foot the travel bill. And so I went. That's where I met Dolores, who was trying to ensure her son and other children had safe places to play basketball. She was determined to foster kindness and discipline in those kids. Harper was stunned. All his life, he had seen his father as a staunch, unyielding man of principle, but this story revealed a softer side. Eliza explained that while in Chicago, she and Dolores had worked together to raise funds for new sports equipment. They spent evenings organizing small community drives and cooking meals for local families. Michael would occasionally pop by those gatherings, a young boy back then, sometimes dribbling a ball at the edge of the hall, Eliza recalled with a nostalgic smile. He was polite, and you could see he had a spark in him, even though we never knew he'd grow up to be a legend in basketball and beyond. Listening to Eliza's story, Harper felt both awe and a twinge of sorrow. His father, now passed, had unknowingly played a role in supporting a family he would later see as politically opposed to his own beliefs. Yet there it was, in flesh and blood history, a bond formed many years ago, bridging families through shared acts of community service. You see, dear, Eliza said, patting Harper's hand gently, you might feel like you and Michael Jordan have to be on opposite sides. But if you look a bit deeper, your father helped send me to Chicago, where I worked hand in hand with his mother. Doesn't that say something? Doesn't that show we're all more connected than we think? The realization settled on Harper like a warm blanket, comforting and challenging. He had always prided himself on taking up his father's mantle of strong principles. But now, he saw that even his father had a capacity for empathy, bridging divides through charitable acts. Harper felt his chest tighten with conflicting emotions. Had he misunderstood what carrying on his father's legacy meant? Perhaps it wasn't about rigidly turning away those who disagreed, but rather about standing firm in kindness, no matter who stood on the other side of the conversation. Eliza finished her meal, leaving Harper in a contemplative hush. Before she left, she smiled at him. People can surprise you, Harper. And sometimes, you surprise yourself. As she headed out, leaning on her cane, Harper stared after her, the words echoing in his mind. The notion that his father and Michael Jordan's mother had once worked together for the greater good made the conflict he'd fueled seem smaller and more personal than ever. He felt a renewed sense of possibility, a gentle stirring of hope that perhaps he could honor his father's spirit by extending a hand to the man he had once turned away. With that in mind, he knew the next steps were crucial, reaching out to Michael Jordan again and forging a path that respected his past and the potential for a more compassionate future. In the following days, Harper wrestled with how best to make amends. The private letter from Michael Jordan remained a beacon of goodwill, and Eliza's surprising revelation about the interconnected pasts of their families weighed heavily on his heart. Finally, after mulling over his options, Harper decided to extend an olive branch in the form of a simple yet heartfelt message. Late one evening, when the diner was closed and the neon sign was switched off, he sat at the counter where he had once refused Michael's service. He took out a pen and a plain piece of stationery, hesitating for a moment before writing. His hand trembled slightly as he began. Michael, I owe you an apology and, more than that, an invitation. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened the day you came in, and I realize now that I let my assumptions and fears guide me instead of my better judgment. You deserved respect, and I did not give it to you. I also learned something that has opened my eyes to our shared history. My father once helped a volunteer named Eliza go to Chicago, where she crossed paths with your mother. That means our families have a deeper connection than I ever imagined. It's a reminder that sometimes we're tied together in ways we can't predict. I invite you back to Harper's Diner anytime you're in town. This time, please come as my honored guest. I know we don't see eye to eye on everything, but I've come to believe that breaking bread can be one of the most powerful ways to bridge differences. If you accept this invitation, it'll mean a lot to me. I'm ready to listen more than speak and committed to treating you with the dignity every person deserves. My staff feels the same, and we want to share this new chapter with you. Sincerely, Harper. He read it twice, wondering if it sounded genuine enough or simply reeked of regret. He felt that every sentence carried the weight of a heartfelt shift in perspective, so he folded the note carefully and placed it in an envelope. The next day, he spoke with Sheila about how to deliver it. She suggested sending it via courier to the address Michael had listed in his letter. Harper agreed, wanting to ensure it reached Michael safely without getting lost in the chaos of social media or the usual postal system. Once the letter was on its way, Harper felt relief and anxiety. Questions spiraled in his mind. Would Michael see it as a genuine attempt to make amends, or would he dismiss it as too little, too late? Harper couldn't deny that business was booming because of Michael's public kindness, and perhaps Michael might think the invitation was just another publicity move. But Harper also knew he had to try. If he continued on as though nothing had changed inside him, he'd be living a lie. He'd never forgive himself if he didn't at least extend a hand in friendship after realizing how their histories overlapped. The staff was supportive, though some were nervous about how the media might spin this new development. A few days passed in quiet anticipation. Each time the doorbell chimed, Harper's heart jumped, half expecting Michael to walk in. When the phone rang, he'd brace himself to hear a familiar voice on the other end. But life went on in its small, ordinary moments. People came to eat, left satisfied or curious, and the swirling reporters began to thin out as the story grew older. Yet, under that surface, calm lay an undercurrent of possibility. Sheila noticed Harper smiling more often or gazing toward the parking lot as if expecting a visitor. The entire diner felt charged with a quiet hope that Michael Jordan would accept the invitation and show the town a different side of what it means to find common ground. For now, they could only wait, wondering if the seeds of humility and understanding that Harper had planted would eventually bloom into reconciliation. One evening, long after closing time, Harper lingered in the diner. He had decided to keep the place open for a private dinner, just in case Michael Jordan accepted the invitation. The staff had helped prepare a small feast of the diner's signature dishes: warm cornbread, slow-cooked pot roast, fresh green beans, and the legendary homemade apple pie. Every plate gleamed under the dim glow of the overhead lights. Sheila stayed behind to assist, wearing a blend of excitement and anxious anticipation on her face. If it happened, this wasn't a public event. No reporters, no crowd, just a quiet meeting. The clock struck 8, then 9. Harper wondered if Michael had received the note and chosen not to respond, or if the courier had misplaced it. He paced by the windows, glancing out at the nearly deserted street. The soft buzz of the neon sign cast shimmering reflections on the glass, reminding him of the night he'd refused Michael a seat. Regret flared briefly in his chest, but he reminded himself he was here to make things right if given the chance. At 9:30, a car's headlights appeared at the far end of the street. Harper held his breath, watching as the vehicle pulled up slowly in front of the diner. The driver's door opened and out stepped Michael Jordan. He looked around, recalling the night he'd been turned away, then approached the door. Harper rushed forward, heart pounding, and unlocked it to welcome him in. The tension of that moment gave way to an awkward but genuine handshake. "Thank you for coming," Harper said quietly, stepping aside to let Michael enter the warmly lit diner. Michael nodded, offering a polite smile. "Thank you for inviting me," he responded, his voice calm, with just a hint of curiosity. He noticed the plates of steaming food on the counter and tables, which smelled comforting and inviting. The two men took seats in one of the booths near the window, ironically, the same booth Harper had refused Michael before. This time, though, there was no hush of shocked patrons, no confrontational stance. Only the faint hum of the overhead lights and the aroma of a home-cooked meal. Sheila brought a pair of plates, setting them down with a gentle smile. She said nothing, sensing the moment's importance, then retreated to the kitchen to give them space. They both sat there momentarily, silent, feeling the weight of their unspoken histories. Harper glanced at Michael, unsure of how to begin. Finally, clearing his throat, he said, "I'm truly sorry about how I treated you that day. I was so caught up in my beliefs that I forgot the simplest rule of hospitality, feeding a hungry guest." Michael listened, his gaze steady but not harsh. "I appreciate your apology," he replied softly, "but you should know I understand where some of that fear or anger might come from. We all carry our past, our influences. I've had my own struggles, too." The conversation continued in fits and starts as each man tried to lower the guard built around him for so long. Michael admitted that being turned away had stung more than he expected, reminding him of times when people judged him for reasons that had nothing to do with who he was. Harper confessed that he had allowed his father's staunch opinions to form a barricade between himself and anyone who differed politically. Gradually, the tension in the booth melted. The pot roast helped. They agreed it was one of the best in the region, trading compliments on the meat's tenderness and the perfect seasoning balance. They moved on to share personal stories. Michael spoke about his grandmother's lessons of compassion, while Harper talked about the day he hired Sheila because she was hungry and lost. They discovered unexpected parallels in their lives, from the mentors who shaped them to the dreams they harbored for a better community. By the time they dug into slices of apple pie, the tone had shifted from regretful to reflective and then to cautiously hopeful. Each spoonful of dessert sweetened the awkwardness. The night wore on, with the diner sign still casting a gentle glow against the darkness outside. If anyone had peeked through the window, they would have seen not two enemies or adversaries but just two men quietly sharing a meal, seeking understanding. And in that small act of fellowship, they laid the foundation for what might come next, a bridge built over the divide that had once separated them. As the last crumbs of apple pie disappeared from their plates, a relaxed calm settled in the diner. Michael took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the warmth that spread through him. He looked at Harper, who seemed less tense than when they first sat down. There was no escaping the differences in their political beliefs, but for the moment, they let the conversation drift to shared human experiences rather than divisive issues. In a quiet voice, Michael began to explain how, over the years, his political positions had been shaped by personal struggles and stories from close friends. He mentioned traveling across the country, meeting families who had faced hardships, and how these encounters fueled his desire to speak out. "I know sometimes I come across as too direct," he admitted, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "Maybe I don't always see the effect that directness can have on others. But I've seen real suffering that I can't ignore." Harper nodded, understanding that passion often fueled strong opinions. "I've spent most of my life in this town," he said, eyes drifting toward the old photos hanging on the diner's walls, snapshots of his parents, black and white images of the diner's early days. "My beliefs formed around protecting what we've got here, ensuring nobody tries to change it in ways that hurt our community. I guess I saw you as a threat to that, and it triggered something in me. Maybe it was an overreaction, or maybe I never learned to handle disagreements better." Michael leaned back, crossing his arms in a thoughtful gesture. "And here I was, thinking about how being turned away felt like a rejection of my entire life's work. It's funny how we interpret actions in the context of our own fears and hopes." He paused, then offered a small smile. "Sometimes, a refusal isn't about me personally. It's about what I represent. I get that. But I think we can do better, don't you? We can talk about issues without vilifying the person." The two men let the words sink in. Around them, the diner's silence felt comforting, like a blank slate on which they could rewrite their story. Harper recalled Eliza's revelation about his father supporting the volunteer trip that had led her to cross paths with Michael's mother. "I found out recently," Harper said, "that my dad helped this town more than I realized. I used to think his unyielding stance was all about never giving an inch, but he also had a generous side. Maybe I lost sight of that." Michael's eyes reflected empathy. "We all have blind spots," he replied gently. "I can be so focused on what I'm fighting for that I forget to see the person in front of me. We need reminders, like a letter, a conversation, or even being refused service, to snap us out of our bubbles." They both chuckled softly at the irony that a refusal to serve a meal had led to a deeper understanding of each other's viewpoints. In time, they discussed the diner's sudden surge in popularity and the dilemma Harper faced about the potential expansion opportunity. Michael listened carefully, and while he didn't try to push any particular decision, he offered one insight: opportunity isn't always just about making money or growing bigger. It can be about lifting up others, too. If you decide to expand, you could employ more people in this town, giving them stability. That's community building. And I'm always in favor of that. Harper appreciated Michael's perspective, seeing that it wasn't just business talk. Michael spoke from a desire to help communities thrive. Harper didn't need to argue or defend his stance for once. He nodded, pondering how acceptance and growth might look if he integrated them into his diner's future. By the time the clock inched toward midnight, they had reached a mutual place of respect, if not perfect agreement, on every issue. The conversation had been raw and real, unveiling the humanity often buried under political headlines and social media chatter. They parted with a handshake, a real one that carried shared respect. As Michael approached the door, he said softly, "Thank you for the meal, Harper. And for hearing me out." Harper responded, "Thank you for giving me a chance. I'm glad we did this." Sheila, who had lingered in the background, witnessed the transformation in those hushed hours. What began as tension concluded with warmth, and she felt a flutter of hope that if these two men could find common ground, maybe the town, too, could learn from their example. The country could benefit from such stories of turning political hostility into personal understanding. It was a moment that reminded everyone present how, at the core, we're all human, yearning for connection and respect. The next morning, Harper woke up with a sense of renewal that he hadn't felt in years. Although the previous night's conversation had stretched late into the evening, the mental clarity he gained from it seemed to banish his usual fatigue. Arriving at the diner, he found the staff already bustling about, the aroma of sizzling bacon and brewed coffee filling the air. Sheila grinned at him, instantly picking up on his lighter mood. The day carried on as it had in recent times, still busier than the pre-viral days, though the initial media swarm had thinned. Around mid-afternoon, Harper received a phone call from the local investment group he had been in touch with. They were eager to finalize a proposal that could lead to an expansion, a new dining area, updated kitchen equipment, and even a second location in a neighboring town. The person on the other end of the line spoke enthusiastically, emphasizing how Michael Jordan's mention of Harper's Diner had created a surge of interest among potential partners. After the call, Harper gathered the team for a spontaneous meeting near the dessert display. He explained the proposal in detail, the amount of money involved, the timeline, and the changes that would be expected. Some staff listened excitedly, picturing themselves in a new, modern kitchen or holding managerial roles in a second location. Others displayed caution, wanting to ensure the diner would keep its small-town charm and values. Sheila asked whether they would still honor the local suppliers who provided fresh produce or if cost-cutting measures might force them to rely on larger distributors. Harper felt the tug of conflicting emotions once again. Expanding would undeniably bring new opportunities, jobs for people in the community, a chance to serve more customers and financial security. Yet he worried about the diner losing its essence, that warm, personal touch that made Harper's Diner more than just a restaurant. Would we become just another chain? He wondered aloud. And how do we reconcile that all of this stems from Michael Jordan's endorsement, the same man I once turned away? As if on cue, Michael called that very afternoon to check in. "I've been thinking about how we talked last night," he said over the phone. "I heard there's a potential expansion on the table. How are you feeling about it?" Harper appreciated the concern, once more struck by the considerate tone in Michael's voice. They discussed the pros and cons, with Michael cautioning Harper to remain true to his vision. "Don't do it just for the money," Michael advised, "but if it aligns with how you want to help the town grow, it could be a good step. You can keep local suppliers and personal touch in the picture, but it might require careful planning." After hanging up, Harper mulled over everything he'd heard, his staff's enthusiasm, Sheila's concerns, Michael's supportive but measured advice. That evening, he asked the staff to join him for a more formal meeting after closing. Over cups of hot chocolate and leftover pie, they debated the future of the diner. Each employee had a chance to speak. Matt envisioned new decor that could attract younger crowds, while Alvarez insisted the menu remain rooted in the classics that had built their reputation. When the debate calmed, Harper cleared his throat. He made it clear he wouldn't proceed without their collective input. "If we say yes," he told them, "we do it on our terms, keeping our recipes, local partnerships, and community-driven spirit. Maybe we can even start a program to employ struggling young people or those needing a second chance. Turning away folks hasn't done us any good. Maybe it's time we open our arms in a bigger way." The staff murmured in agreement. Sheila's eyes sparkled with pride. "This is why I stayed at Harper's Diner," she said. "Because deep down, I know we're not just a business. We're a family that wants to welcome people in, not push them out." That unanimous sentiment pushed Harper to inform the investors that he'd accept their offer only if they agreed to those conditions, retaining the diner's heart and soul. He also made it a point that their expansion must prioritize giving back to the community. The final decision felt like a new chapter shaped by the lessons of the past few weeks. While Harper braced himself for the work ahead, he felt optimistic. Embracing a broader future did not mean discarding the values that defined Harper's Diner. Instead, it meant allowing those values to grow and reach more people, reflecting the realization that bridging divides could create something far more significant than either party had imagined. Several weeks slipped by, and a subtle transformation began to ripple through the small town. Word of Harper's decision to accept the investment, under the condition of maintaining the diner's authentic charm and local focus, spread quickly. Initially, there had been some skepticism, especially among the older townsfolk who worried that the diner would morph into a soulless, corporate eatery. Yet, as construction crews arrived to expand the dining area and refurbish the kitchen, people noticed that the changes weren't stripping the place of its character. The diner's old wooden booths, which had so many stories etched into them, remained. The chalkboard menu was updated daily with the same beloved specials, and local farmers continued delivering fresh produce each morning. Harper established a community bulletin board and job center in a corner of the building that used to be a small storage room. He pinned up lists of local job openings, resource flyers for needy families, and town event announcements. Sheila took charge of it, adding her creative flair by decorating it with pictures of local landmarks and inspirational quotes. Meanwhile, Alvarez worked with the new equipment in the expanded kitchen. He was happy to discover that the additional resources let him prepare larger batches of homemade soups and pies without sacrificing the careful touch he prided himself on. As construction neared its final phase, Harper unveiled a program to partner with a local youth center, offering part-time positions to teenagers needing job experience or a safe place to learn work skills. The staff welcomed these newcomers with open arms, teaching them everything from busboy duties to basic cooking techniques. The kids brought fresh energy into the diner, chatting with customers and brightening the atmosphere with their laughter. Curious travelers kept arriving to see the diner that Michael Jordan mentioned, often snapping photos next to the newly painted sign that still boasted Harper's Diner, best burgers in town. In this new era, Harper ensured that nobody was turned away, no matter who they were or where they came from. He still held tight to his personal beliefs, yet he found a new way to live them, by offering kindness and a hot meal rather than letting ideological boundaries become walls. The local paper ran a feature story titled Harper's Diner, A Legacy of Change, describing how an incident that could have torn the community apart catalyzed unity and growth. Reporters who had once doggedly pursued Harper for a soundbite now returned to cover uplifting stories of the diner's expansion and community outreach. One journalist interviewed Sheila, who told them she had been welcomed in her time of need and was happy to see that spirit extended to even more people. Another article featured testimonials from the hired teenagers, describing how they felt valued, respected, and inspired by the diner's supportive culture. In addition, the town itself enjoyed a mini economic boom. Neighboring shops and small businesses benefited from the extra foot traffic. Visitors who came for the dinner stayed to browse local boutiques, chat with artisans, and spend a weekend exploring the scenic surroundings. Some started calling it the Michael Jordan effect, but Harper preferred to think of it as the community effect, because he saw how many people had joined hands to make this positive change a reality. Some nights, sitting at one of the new booths after closing, Harper would quietly reflect on how different things felt compared to that fateful day he turned Michael Jordan away. He marveled at the irony. The person he rejected had sparked the growth that now enriched his business and the entire town. A humbling realization forced him to confront how fear could so easily masquerade as a principle and how one small act of kindness could have ripple effects far beyond what anyone might predict. By the time the last nails were hammered into the diner's expanded walls, Harper's Diner had become a glowing example of what a community could accomplish when it set aside divisiveness. Though the place had physically changed, the guiding spirit of warmth, generosity, and unity remained stronger than ever. If anything, it was that very spirit, now more visible and inclusive, that kept drawing people in, teaching everyone who stepped through its doors the power of believing in something bigger than our differences. A few months later, Harper's Diner bustled with activity on a bright Saturday afternoon. The sound of a spatula scraping against the grill mingled with the chatter of customers. The newly renovated dining area thrived with a comfortable ambience that felt both modern and nostalgic. Light streamed in through large windows, illuminating fresh flowers on each table. A family visiting from out of state marveled at how they had heard about this place through social media and decided to drop by during their road trip. Harper stood behind the counter, jotting down an order. He paused when he noticed a familiar figure quietly stepping inside. Michael Jordan, dressed casually, offering a friendly nod to those who recognized him. Harper smiled, his heart warming as he waved Michael over. There was no media crew tagging along, no big announcement, just a man stopping by for a meal. Harper could almost hear the soft exhale of relief as Michael settled into a booth, greeted by staff who no longer saw him as an unwelcome stranger but as someone who belonged. While Harper's convictions hadn't morphed overnight into a mirror of Michael's ideals, he understood that humanity transcends politics. The act of feeding someone, of welcoming them into a shared space, spoke volumes about compassion and respect. Through his late-night talks with Michael and the revelations about their shared history, he had uncovered a deeper truth. Differences don't have to be divisions, especially when kindness takes precedence. Every time Michael dropped by, the entire diner buzzed with a quiet acknowledgement that progress had been made, a living testimony of how a single moment of hostility could be transformed into an ongoing story of reconciliation. Sheila continued to manage the community bulletin board, which now overflowed with thank you notes from satisfied customers, flyers about local charity events, and proud announcements from the teenagers who had gained work experience under the diner's roof. A few of those teens had gone on to college or vocational programs, often stopping by to hug Sheila or greet Harper with gratitude. The diner's heart had grown with its physical expansion, spreading a message of inclusivity and second chances. Every so often, passers-by still expressed shock when they learned of the diner's past refusal to serve Michael Jordan. It seemed almost unthinkable, given the warmth that now defined the place. Yet, in retelling that story, Harper emphasized the lesson learned: we're all capable of growing, he'd say, and this diner stands as proof of what can happen when you choose grace over grievance. Sometimes, he'd look at the spot where Michael once stood, politely leaving in silence, and he'd feel a twinge of guilt mixed with pride. Guilt for how he initially treated someone he now considered a friend, and pride in the changes that followed. For Michael's part, he rarely mentioned the incident in interviews or on social media anymore. If asked, he'd often reply with a gentle smile, pointing out that the real story was how a community used a difficult moment to come together. He continued to donate to local causes, sometimes quietly, other times through more significant events. And whenever he was in the area, he made a point of swinging by Harper's Diner, enjoying a plate of pot roast or a slice of that legendary apple pie. In those small, personal gestures, he showed that acceptance could be an ongoing process, a series of small steps toward one another rather than away. Eventually, the furor from national reporters moved on to other stories. But Harper's Diner remained a beacon for anyone seeking a hearty meal and a reminder that even deep-rooted differences can be bridged by empathy, conversation, and a hot meal shared in good faith. The owner, who once wore his refusal like a badge of pride, now led with humility and understanding. And in the grand scheme of things, that might have been the greatest triumph. As the days rolled into months and years, people continued to pass through the diner's doors, sharing laughter, stories, and the occasional debate. Yet the foundation of respect, of seeing one another as human first, stood firm. In a world that often feels too divided, Harper's Diner served as a testament. Sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness, one invitation, or one conversation to remind us that the most revolutionary act in a divided world is to show grace to those we disagree with. And so the story ends not with a final punctuation but with an open door, an enduring invitation for everyone to come, sit, and find common ground at a table meant for all.